"Hey, sweetheart, spill a drink for us. It'll match your salary." One of the men sneered as Emily stepped carefully between the tables, balancing a tray loaded with appetizers. The warm glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished wood, but it did nothing to soften the sharpness in his tone. Another leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of whiskey, eyes glinting with amusement. "Do they pay you in tips or pity here?" he added, his laugh sharp and loud enough to make nearby diners glance nervously. Emily's hands tightened briefly around the tray. She lowered her gaze, keeping her voice calm and polite. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked softly. Her tone carried respect, but also a subtle firmness that came from years of training, discipline that her father had instilled in her from childhood. The men were far from satisfied. One pretended to trip her, reaching a hand out as if to catch her, while another whistled crudely, making several heads turn. "Don't worry, princess," the first sneered. "Maybe one day you'll afford a real job." Their laughter spread through the restaurant, sharp and cruel. Emily's jaw clenched, but her posture remained steady. She didn't flinch. When she returned with another round of drinks, one of them leaned forward, blocking her path. "Dance for us, waitress. Or maybe beg for a bigger tip," he taunted, shoving her lightly on the shoulder. The glasses on her tray rattled dangerously. Emily whispered, almost inaudibly, "Please, don't." But the men only laughed louder, emboldened, pushing her shoulder again as they leaned back in their seats, smirking at each other. Another added, grinning, "Come on, a smile would suit you better than that scared little face. Don't be shy, princess." He gestured theatrically, mocking her careful steps. The restaurant seemed to grow quieter, diners looking on with uncertain eyes. Phones were subtly raised, capturing the tension. Emily kept her gaze low, her hands steady, moving the tray with deliberate care. "You think you can just ignore us?" the first man demanded, leaning closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. "A little respect for who's paying your wages wouldn't hurt, huh?" His hand brushed her arm as if testing her patience, and the other two laughed, egging him on. Emily kept silent, steadying the tray and her nerves. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, stepping slightly to the side to pass. But the men weren't done. "Not so fast," the second one barked, leaning forward, elbows on the table. "Did your mama teach you to serve or to hide? Huh? You gonna stand there all night and act all delicate?" The third joined in, pointing a finger mockingly. "Yeah, princess, show us some personality. Or are you just another wallflower who thinks her little apron makes her untouchable?" Emily's fingers tightened on the tray. She moved carefully, lowering it onto a nearby table with precision, her eyes briefly flicking to the manager, who froze in shock. The men, seeing her pause, laughed louder. "Careful, careful," one jeered. "Don't drop something on yourself. We wouldn't want you to get hurt before you dance for us." The air in the restaurant thickened, murmurs rising as diners shifted uneasily in their seats. Emily inhaled slowly, remaining outwardly calm, but her pulse quickened. The man leaned closer, grinning, voice sharper now. "Maybe you should bow, princess. Show some respect. We're trying to be nice here. Don't make us repeat ourselves." Another jabbed, laughing cruelly. Yeah. Or maybe a little curtsy? Or is that above your pay grade?" Emily's lips pressed together, jaw tight, eyes on the tray. She stepped carefully, moving around their table, and whispered again, almost inaudibly, "Please." "Please what?" The first man sneered, leaning back in his chair, smirking. "Beg? Cry? Or are you gonna just keep staring at your little tray like a good little girl?" The second whistled, loud and mocking, clapping his hands slowly. "Come on, princess, entertain us. Or are you afraid we might see what's behind that apron?" Emily's chest rose and fell steadily. She moved another careful step, the tray perfectly balanced, her eyes on the floor, her silence unbroken. "Ah, come on," the third man barked. "We're getting bored. You gonna do something, or just keep looking all innocent and sweet? Don't think we're impressed yet." Emily's fingers tightened on the tray again, her shoulders squared as she pivoted slightly to avoid their reaching hands. She whispered softly, "Sir." Emily's voice was soft, barely carrying over the hum of the restaurant, yet there was a steel underneath it that the men didn't anticipate. The first man leaned forward, smirk still plastered across his face, clearly expecting her to fumble, to hesitate, to break under the weight of his mockery. Instead, She paused for just a heartbeat, her body coiled in measured stillness, every muscle prepared, every instinct honed from years of unspoken training. And then she moved. It was almost imperceptible at first, one deliberate step forward, but what followed was a controlled explosion of motion. She swept the first man's leg out from under him, precise, fast, and devastating. He toppled to the floor with a stunned gasp, a crash that silenced the table's laughter and drew wide-eyed stares from the diners. Forks stopped midair, glasses teetered. The restaurant collectively exhaled, frozen in disbelief. The second man lunged at her, perhaps thinking he could recover control, but Emily anticipated him in the blink of an eye. A quick pivot, a twist of his arm behind his back, and with a graceful yet brutal motion, she flipped him over a chair. He hit the floor hard, groaning, the sound hollow and humiliating in the cavernous dining room. The third, frantic and enraged, grabbed at her wrist, attempting to assert some control, but she was already moving, her elbow striking squarely into his chest, sending him sprawling against the wall. The restaurant froze. Every patron's jaw dropped, eyes wide. A faint gasp escaped someone near the bar. Phones had been quietly raised moments ago, but now diners whispered to one another in disbelief. Did she just take them all down? A man muttered under his breath. Another leaned toward his companion, whispering. She moved like a soldier, like a seal or something. Emily remained perfectly composed, standing tall, breathing measured, not a single bead of sweat on her brow. Her movements were precise, fluid, and controlled. Each strike the product of years of disciplined training, each reaction instinctual yet deliberate. She didn't shout, didn't gloat. There was no triumph in her eyes, only focus and controlled power. For just a moment, the memory of her childhood flashed before her. The early mornings when she would wake before dawn to run laps around the neighborhood, her father pacing beside her silently, timing every step, instructing her to focus on balance, control, and endurance. The smell of the dojo, the faint tang of sweat, the polished wood of the floors, replaced the warm, ambient scent of the restaurant. Her father's sharp commands echoed. Always stay 2 steps ahead. Anticipate before reacting. Strength is nothing without control. Years of sparring against opponents bigger and stronger than her, learning to use precision, timing, and leverage rather than brute force, had led to this moment. Every block, every sweep, every pivot she executed tonight was a reflection of that meticulous training. Her dreams of professional martial arts competitions had been sidelined after her mother fell ill, forcing her to earn a living at 18, working long hours in restaurants. But she had never abandoned the discipline instilled in her youth. Even in an apron and heels, she was a fighter, calm, patient, and lethal when necessary. The men on the floor groaned, clutching ribs and arms, their bravado shattered. The first tried to rise, grimacing, muttering, "This isn't over." But his words sounded hollow, stripped of menace by the humiliation and the sheer impossibility of their earlier confidence. The second was still curled awkwardly near the chair he had been flipped over, eyes wide in shock, staring at Emily as if seeing her for the first time. The third leaned weakly against the wall, chest heaving, staring in disbelief at the woman who had dispatched all 3 of them with such swift precision. The manager rushed over, mouth open, hand frozen mid-gesture. "Emily, what?" But his words trailed off as he took in the scene. The 3 men sprawled across the floor, diners staring in awe, phones still recording. His voice was lost in the ripple of astonishment that flowed through the room. Patrons whispered, clapped softly, and exchanged incredulous glances. Some muttered phrases like, "Did you see that?" and "I've never," while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. Emily, chest rising and falling steadily, simply inclined her head slightly. "Excuse me. I'll get someone to help them up," she murmured, calm and unflustered, as if her movements had been nothing more than a necessary extension of her role in the restaurant. She didn't wait for thanks, didn't bask in the fleeting attention. Her focus remained sharp, her mind already assessing the next step, even as whispers and soft claps began to rise around her. In a quiet corner of her mind, she revisited her early lessons in discipline. Every strike tonight had been a blend of patience and anticipation. Her father had taught her that the best fighter waits, observing, studying, letting arrogance show its cracks before acting. And that principle had guided every move. The sweep, the pivot, the elbow strike. All calculated, never excessive, never vengeful. Strength without control, he had said, was useless. Tonight, her discipline had transformed mockery into order, arrogance into silence. Even as the adrenaline faded, her awareness did not. She noticed the subtle stares of patrons, some recording, some whispering excitedly. Her movements had drawn attention not just to the violence of the act, but to the precision, the calm, and the complete mastery of herself in the chaos. People began to murmur quietly, admiration mixed with disbelief. Phones were raised to capture every angle, but Emily barely acknowledged them. Her purpose had never been performance. It was measured action, restraint, and control. The first man groaned, pushing himself slightly upright, while the second and third remained sprawled. Their bravado had vanished, replaced with uncertainty, awe, and the faint flicker of fear. Patrons whispered softly, some daring to clap, others simply shaking their heads. Emily glanced briefly at the manager, who still seemed frozen between shock and admiration. Her apron was spotless, her hair barely ruffled. It was as if she had merely shifted her weight from one place to another, yet the impact was undeniable. Some whispered to each other. She didn't even shout. Her timing, it's like she knew exactly what they'd do. Others debated, martial arts? Military training? There's no way someone could. But their words were fragmented, trailing off into disbelief. Emily's calm stance dominated the room, not because she had screamed or flexed her muscles, but because her discipline and quiet strength spoke louder than any words ever could. And then, as she straightened, a brief flicker of memory passed through her. Nights at the dojo, mats worn from decades of practice, sparring partners twice her size, her father correcting her stance repeatedly. The smell of sweat, the sharp tang of resin on the wooden floors, the sting of repeated strikes against padded arms. These had been the foundation. Every moment of her life up to now, every sacrifice, every disciplined choice, had led to this single act. Quiet, precise, and undeniable power in the midst of humiliation. The three men groaned and muttered insults that fell flat, empty echoes of arrogance now gone. Diners began to murmur, some clapping softly, others still too stunned to speak. Phones recorded every movement, every controlled strike, capturing a moment that would soon ripple far beyond this small restaurant. Emily, calm and composed, allowed herself a single, controlled breath. She adjusted her apron, glanced briefly toward the kitchen, and then back at the scene before her. Three men sprawled, humiliated, their bravado completely shattered. The manager stepped closer, voice shaky. Emily, I don't even know what to say. Emily inclined her head politely. I'll handle the rest, she murmured, her tone steady. Behind her, diners whispered, some pointing at their phones, some quietly nodding in approval. She had become a figure of awe, not through boastfulness, but through precision, control, and the quiet force of her presence. And as the men groaned and tried to scramble to their feet, one of them muttered weakly, "This isn't over." But even in his defiance, his voice lacked conviction. Emily's gaze remained calm, unflinching, as she stepped around the table with measured ease. The room hummed with whispered astonishment. Phones were still raised, capturing the moment. Diners exchanged glances, trying to process what had just happened. Emily moved past them silently, a small figure in an apron, but carrying the presence of someone far larger than any of the men on the floor. The manager finally found his voice, stepping forward with hurried footsteps, eyes wide and alarmed. Emily, what? How? He stammered, trailing off as he looked from her calm stance to the three men groaning in the middle of the floor. Nearby diners were murmuring, some clapping softly, others staring in disbelief. One man whispered, "She didn't even shout, she just handled it." Another, a woman holding her phone, murmured, "Like a seal, she moved like a seal." Cameras were still raised, recording every movement, every precise strike, every subtle glance of control and dominance that Emily displayed without a single word. The manager cleared his throat. "Security, please escort these gentlemen outside immediately." A pair of uniformed staff hurried over, gently but firmly guiding the three men to their feet. They stumbled, muttering, clutching arms and ribs, their once loud arrogance now replaced with awkward shame. "This isn't over." The first man barked weakly, but the sound lacked menace, hollow in the face of public humiliation and the quiet authority Emily exuded. The security team guided them toward the door, their pride shattered. Patrons clapped softly, some nodding in silent admiration, others whispering in awe about the sheer precision and discipline they had witnessed. Emily inclined her head politely, murmuring, "Thank you. I'll be fine from here," as she moved to continue her duties. Her composure never wavered, but the energy in the room had shifted completely. She was no longer invisible. She was unmistakable, a presence commanding both attention and respect. Phones buzzed in pockets as clips of the confrontation began circulating quietly. Someone whispered, "This is going to go viral. She just took down 3 grown men in seconds." Others nodded, eyes wide. The manager, still speechless, finally muttered, "Emily, that was extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary." She simply smiled faintly, bowing her head, her movements precise, controlled, never excessive. By the time her shift ended, the videos had already begun to spread. Social media lit up with stunned reactions. "Waitress drops 3 men in 15 seconds, like a seal in a dining room. Who is this woman?" Within hours, the clips were shared widely, admired for her restraint, her precision, and the way she had turned humiliation into quiet power. Martial artists and self-defense experts began analyzing her movements, praising her calm, controlled technique. The next morning, Emily walked into the restaurant, quiet as usual, unaware of the storm she had ignited online. Phones buzzed with notifications, messages from friends and family, and even emails from local news outlets. Her manager greeted her, still in awe. "Emily, you need to see this. People are calling it unbelievable. There are thousands of views already. News channels are picking it up." She blinked, surprised but composed. By afternoon, the clips had reached millions. Interviews, commentary, and social media reactions praised her skill, restraint, and courage. One particularly viral post called her the invisible fighter, graceful, calm, unstoppable. Another post read, "She didn't just fight. She commanded respect without a word." Emily's quiet demeanor had become her signature. Her actions spoke louder than any introduction ever could. Local organizations began reaching out, inviting her to speak at self-defense seminars, women's empowerment workshops, and even martial arts clubs. A prominent dojo contacted her, offering a position as an instructor, recognizing her skill and discipline as something that could inspire young students. Emily, who had once trained in secret, silently accepting that her passion for martial arts had been sidelined for years, now found doors opening she never expected. Within weeks, Emily's life had shifted. Young girls lined up to learn from her, calling her Miss Emily with admiration. Parents thanked her for teaching confidence, discipline, and courage. And though she remained humble, her presence commanded respect. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked waitress who endured mockery. She had become a symbol of quiet strength, restraint, and the power of discipline, the proof that dignity and patience could, in the right moment, rise above arrogance. The 3 men who had mocked her remained a cautionary tale in local circles. Their arrogance and entitlement had been met with precision and calm, leaving a story that spread far beyond the walls of the restaurant. Emily didn't gloat or celebrate. She simply continued her life, carrying herself with the same measured grace she had always learned to maintain. Her strength, both physical and mental, was now visible to the world, and for the first time, the world recognized it. One afternoon, sunlight spilled through the windows of the dojo as Emily walked out, adjusting her belt, a faint smile on her lips. Students bowed respectfully, eager to learn from someone who had lived what she now taught. The energy around her was warm, vibrant, and filled with admiration. She had come a long way from the small waitress who had been mocked in a corner of a restaurant. Her life, once quiet and overlooked, had been transformed through discipline, patience, and the courage to act decisively when the time came. Emily paused at the doorway, sunlight catching the strands of her hair, her eyes scanning the students practicing their forms. A young girl approached timidly, glancing up at her with awe. "Miss Emily, will you teach me?" she asked softly. Emily knelt briefly to meet her gaze, nodding. "Of course, she said, her voice calm but filled with warmth. Let's get started. Across the city, the story of Emily, the waitress who had dropped 3 men like a seal, continued to circulate. People shared videos, news outlets replayed clips, and social media praised her calm, decisive action. But in the dojo, among the students, Emily's focus remained on teaching, guiding, and instilling the same values of patience, discipline, and quiet strength that had carried her through every challenge. By evening, the sunlight fading and casting long shadows across the training mats, Emily paused for a moment to look out the window. The day had been long, filled with students, interviews, and messages of appreciation. Yet she felt a profound sense of calm. Her path, though unexpected, had led her here, a place where her discipline, once hidden, could inspire others. Where her patience, once tested and mocked, was now celebrated. Where her strength, once silent, was finally recognized. As she straightened, adjusting her uniform, she noticed a small group of students practicing nearby, their movements hesitant but determined. Emily stepped forward, demonstrating a precise block, a measured pivot, a controlled strike. The students mirrored her movements, their eyes bright with focus and admiration. And for the first time, Emily allowed herself a small, quiet smile, knowing that her journey, from mockery to mastery, from invisibility to recognition, had only just begun. Outside, the city lights flickered on, and her story continued to spread online. Messages of admiration poured in from people she would never meet, all inspired by her courage, skill, and restraint. And though the world recognized her now, Emily remained the same, calm, measured, disciplined, and quietly powerful. Her future, once uncertain, now stretched out before her like the sunlight spilling through the dojo windows, bright, open, and full of promise. With a final glance at her students, Emily whispered to herself, almost unheard, "This is just the beginning." She returned to the group, demonstrating another sequence with precision, patience, and the quiet authority that had always defined her. Outside, millions watched, shared, and admired. Inside, Emily taught, guided, and inspired. And in that balance, she had found her place. And that was today's story. What started with cruel mockery ended in a complete reversal. Proof that true worth is never measured by appearances. If you enjoyed this journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments below. And if stories like this inspire you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, thank you for spending this time with me. And remember, sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest victories.